Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Nsw.t with the Madhu Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. And I'm coming to you today. What is today's date? 9/14/2018 to talk about reincarnation in Africa. And I've subtitled today's talk a linguistic perspective. And how this topic came about was basically, just within my group of quote unquote friends on Facebook and the discussions in several different groups and individual pages on this notion of reincarnation. And I think our good brother Unc of the Amon-Ra Squad kind of sparked this debate on whether reincarnation is an African thing. And so on brother Unc's post, he alluded to the fact that reincarnation was in fact not an African idea, but more so a Hindu, Indian idea in practice. And so that sparked the debate. And so it's been ongoing for like a week or two, on Facebook. So I decided to chime in because I'm seeing all the different contributions, made to the discussion. And this is something that I actually already wrote about, actually kind of in passing in my last book, which is Nsw.t Bjt.j, King in Ancient Egyptian, which was released in 2016. And so in chapter 14 of my text is discussing the Shinu, in terms of ancient Egypt, which is a depiction of a rope tied in an oval, and inside of the rope has the name of the king. And so I provided some expanded analysis based on African linguistics or African languages and cultures that could possibly answer a few questions in the ancient Egyptian language, culture, the depictions, artwork, and things of that nature. So that was the main focus of that chapter in terms of chapter 14. However, in the midst of it, I discuss names in reincarnation, because what I argue in that chapter is that the word Shinu is an archaic word for name, and that through a process called paronymy, the word for rope became the symbol for the word for name. And that's why the name of the king is inside the Shinu, because the word for Shinu and this archaic word, which did not survive in the ancient Egyptian language, but however survived in other related African languages with that same phonetic, pronunciations, is presence there. So, the discussion on the Rabus principle and paronymy is another topic altogether. I'll touch on it briefly in this discussion. And so that's, fundamentally what, I'll be addressing today. And so sitting in the background with us is our good brother, Wujawu, with the Sesh Metanetia group, the Seshu Ma Metanetia group, Mani Metanetia group. I'm messing it all up again. But anyway, he's here in the building. If you want to say something to the people.
Just peace to everyone, ETM Hotep. And I had to come in and sit in the bleachers for this one, so I can listen attentively and everything, because this has been a good topic. And I've read chapter 14 of your book, and it's very well written. And so I want to see if you discussed it and articulate and expand on those ideas tonight.
Appreciate it. So apologize for starting late. I know I said I would start at 11 p.m., but Brother Wujawu and I had our own conversation prior to the show, so that kind of went on, and so I'm late. So I apologize, but hopefully y'all with us. I will try not to drag this topic on. I just want to expand the discussion on reincarnation and to insert into your mind something that is not really talked about, and regarding reincarnation, especially in ancient Egypt and in certain parts of Africa. So again, for the greater context, I won't be able to go into all the details, but if you have my book, Nsw.t Bjt.j, a lot of this is in chapter 14. Some of this will be expanded upon in my next book, Aluja, and so you can get it there. So if you don't have my book, I encourage you to purchase it, and because it has a plethora of information, different topics, and everything cited and systematic in terms of its articulation and structure and things of that nature. So it's a wealth of knowledge in there. So I will get started. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I'd like to first shout out everyone who is in the chat room. And so I have my computer up on my other computer over here. So if you see me looking to the side, so I'm gonna try to, as much as possible, look into the chat room to see if there's any questions or anything to that nature. And but I'll be mainly focused on this screen. So I'm gonna share my screen. Let me focus it on this screen now and go to screen share. And then I'm gonna do entire screen, Ladao. Now I can go to the presentation. And see, I'm on this Ubuntu machine. And so it is acting funny. Now, I don't know why it's on a kind of a frozen screen. Let me hide this. Okay, what is going on? Hold on one sec. Let me see what is going on at the moment. Nope, everything seems to be okay there. So there's always some technical difficulties. Let me just try to exit out. Force to quit. And let me try to restart again. So I apologize again for the technical difficulties. So let's try to start the recovery process. And this is an older machine, so it doesn't have that much memory. So I got to be careful of how many things that I have open at once. So it appears that we are back. And so I'm gonna wait till I see it on the other computer in terms of the full screen. And so it looks like everything is a go. So, okay. And y'all can hear me. You can hear me well.
Yep, I think everything. I think Houston, we have liftoff.
Okay. So as I stated earlier, today's conversation is titled Reincarnation and its Connection to Names in Africa, a Linguistic Perspective. And this is a presentation I just kind of put together probably like an hour, well, for the duration of about an hour and a half leading up to this moment. So I may have some things kind of out of order, but that doesn't matter. I'll straighten it up for next time. So as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of this data is in my book, Nsw.t King and Ancient Egyptian, A Lesson in Paronymy and Leadership, 2016. And some more we're going to expand on this a little bit in my upcoming book, Aluja Volume 2, China into Science and Philosophy. That used to be Religion and Philosophy. I'm going to deal with the science aspect later. Anyway, and this isn't going to be the cover. This is just something temporary I put for the slideshow. And so before we get started, y'all know that I follow the Theophilo Obinga model in terms of the grouping of certain African languages, which in 1993 he dubbed and gave it the name Negro Egyptian. And in 2010, who we have on the screen here, brother Jean-Claude Mboli, on his Origine de Langues Africaines, or the African Origins of Languages. This text expands on Theophilo Obinga's work, and he was able, through the comparative method, to do a better grouping of the languages. And it is because of this grouping of the languages that we can better assess and make certain hypotheses and predictions regarding certain shared cultural features of the languages that belong to this language group. And so a discussion on the merits of Negro Egyptian, which I have renamed Nsw.t, is beyond the scope of this particular discussion. When my new book comes out, I will have some public discussions discussing the merits of language phyla such as Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and Khoisan, and all of that, and why those linguistic phylums fail when put under scrutiny that is expected, the scientific scrutiny that is expected within a scientific field. So someone asked in the group, in the chat, when does the drop? I intended it for it to drop in October, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'm looking at somewhere probably by the end of January of 2019. So for Brother Sean, that's when I anticipate for the Aluja Volume 2 to be released. So we're going to have to postpone certain conversations until then. But as we, should know, if you have my book, Nsw.t, I give a summary of Jean-Claude Mboli's basically Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work, which I just showed in the previous slide, because it's of course it's written in French. So for those who don't read French and want access, or at least a summary of the ideas behind, the work of Mboli in 2010, then I would recommend, of course, reading my text, Nsw.t King and Ancient Egyptian, 2016. And so, if you had the book, that you'll be familiar with this graph here. And this is the 3 basic stages of Nsw.t, or Negro Egyptian, which is, again, I renamed the Negro Egyptian to Nsw.t. So this is a slightly different map than what is in his text. And as far as this graph is concerned, the only thing that I changed was Negro Egyptian, and I just replaced it with Nsw.t. So that's all that you see in front of you here. But there's archaic Nsw.t, then there's the classical stage of Nsw.t, which is in the center, and then the post-classic Nsw.t, which is what you see in the center bottom. And so one of the reasons why we bring this up is because, you know, these languages that come out of this last stage called post-classic China Intu have interacted with each other for a very long time in various parts of Africa. And so there are certain words and concepts that have been shared among these language groups. And then there are certain aspects that have been inherited from the proto-language. And so this is what this practice is aimed to distinguish, you know, what is borrowing and what is inherited. And so this is another chart of Mboli's that I have remodeled to bring some better clarity to some concepts. And that is from the post-classic China Intu stage, there are basically 4 branches of 4 dialect groups that emerged from there. And so we call one group the Bere branch and the other group the Beher branch. And then each one of those have split off. And on what you see on the far left is what I call Parabantu Bere. It's a part of the Bere branch that split off from pre-Proto-Bantu. And it is from that language, from that group that ultimately gives us Middle Egyptian, Hausa, Zande, the Mande languages. And one of the things that I add in this group that Mboli does not is the Sumerian. So in my new book, we will be discussing Sumerian a lot and doing a lot of comparisons between Egyptian, Sumerian, and the Chi-Bantu languages. So what you see in this green column is the branch, the Bere branch, that ultimately the Chi-Bantu languages derive. And the Chi-Bantu languages are more closer to the post-classic China Intu proto-language than all of the other branches. Then you have the Beher branch, which you find Nuer and Wolof. And then from that split comes Coptic, Songos, Somali, Zerma, and the Banda languages. And so, again, just kind of give you a rough analysis, and all of this is going to make sense, you know, as we go on. And so here's a basic map of the Bere branch of China Intu. And so from the Great Lakes region, this group expands, and then in the Sudan splits off into different groups. So you have the Hausa, the Bambara, the Zande in one group, the Chi-Bantu speakers, and then the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians, you know, going up the Nile, and of course the Sumerians going all the way into Iraq. But one of the reasons why I want to point this out is because there's a group of individual languages that are here that converge in the Nile Valley. And so what you will see is concepts that are actually the same, but the names appear different for the exact same concept. And when Pharaonic Egyptian civilization emerged, certain concepts were borrowed, unknowing that they were the exact same concept. And so this is going to play a major role into understanding the component parts of the body in ancient Egypt, when we're talking about the Ka and the Ren specifically, and its relationship to reincarnation and what that is. Because what I argue is that the so-called Ka, which should be Ker, and the Ren are exactly the same word and the exact same concept. But because two different language groups converged in Egypt, what the Africans tend to do is synthesize, do a syncretic thing, and they found a way to merge these concepts, you know, neatly in the ancient Egyptian culture. So remember, our topic today is on reincarnation. And so what I discuss in the book is that reincarnation in many parts of Africa is really simply the incarnation of the name, and that the name is the soul in Africa, which is your spirit double. And we'll get more into that in a bit. And so the arguments have been that there is, that reincarnation has to deal with DNA. And we got to be careful here and not try to impose something that has been discovered in recent times and then retrofit it into ancient African cultures. Everything doesn't correlate that way. And so there are certain people who believe that there is some kind of physical structure that is actually being reincarnated. And that may not be the case in depending on what African tradition that you're analyzing. And so we have to be careful when we're talking about Africa as if it is a single entity. There is a large amount of commonality, but there are a lot of differences too. And if you don't acknowledge those differences, you'll commit what we call a transsubstantive error. And that is, taking the knowledge of one group from which you study and then try to apply it to other groups which you have not studied. And so, I come back to this slide here. It says, what is a name? And so I argue again that the name is the soul of a person, and that the word for name is connected with the word for breath, wind, and speech in African languages. So again, we mentioned this concept, which a lot of us pronounce as the ka. But that second grapheme that we have here is actually what we call a nasalized uvular trill. It's an R sound. So as we see here at the bottom. And so what I say here is that the soul in the Egyptian writing script is rendered with the Gardner sign D28. So that's what you see up here. It's a group of a pair of arms and hands raised up, connected by the shoulders, it would appear. And so with the consonant value of this KR, and it's defined as soul, spirit, essence of a being, and personality. And so this is actually a KR or AKL root. The nasalized uvular trill grapheme, this grapheme is a nasalized uvular trill. So understand that this is not an A sound. It's not ka. It has a consonant sequence KR or KL, depending on the dialect. And, this is just, and y'all got to excuse, how some of the images and things are formatted. Again, I created this presentation in Microsoft PowerPoint, but since I'm on Ubuntu, they don't have the Microsoft suite. I have to use, one of their programs, and it doesn't render everything quite as nicely as you would see in Microsoft PowerPoint. So excuse the image over or under the text over here, but I'm only showing this here so for those who are reviewing it, you can pause and see where this nasalized uvular trill is in related African languages. You will see that it is an R or an L sound where this is. So it's not ka, but kera, things of that nature. So I won't go through this. You can just read it yourself when you come back to review. And so with that being said, the soul has many different cognates in the African languages. And so what we call the quote unquote ka is in the Akan called the okra. In the Ga language is called the kla. In the Benin language is called Nkira. In Kwara, another Cushitic language, is called Nkira, which is a soul or life. In the in the Tayo language is Nkira, which is spirit. And so all of these are the same word. And so if you want to vocalize the word ka, I would go with okra for now, the Akan variation. And and is going to be pertinent in terms of our discussion, here today. So we're going to continue. As I mentioned in my text and demonstrated with more examples, the word for name comes from the same word for speech, or to call, or to say something. And so it's no coincidence, again, in the Egyptian language, that the same consonant sequence for the word soul is, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, the word for name, because the word ka also means name, but that the word for ka, name, is also for the word to say. And so cognates for this text is, kero, call. Arabic, in the Hebrew language, Arabic, kera, say, or to read. In the Hausa language, kira, call. In Chiluba Bantu, we say akula, which is, oral speech. Akula, talk, speak, utter, express. Makulu, language. In the Igbo language, we say kalu, voice, sound, to declare. In tree, we say kra. The tree icon, like when you say okra, for soul, that o is it nominalizes. It's a nominalizing prefix, and that it's also an agent prefix. But so without that o prefix, it's just a word for call for or place an order. In Hebrew, again, which I should have put up there, is kol, sound, voice, thunder. And so all of these words are cognate in the language. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the relationship, there's a relationship between the word for name and the word for call. And we can see this in other languages that have nothing to do with the word for ka. And so this is just a common semantics. So in Egyptian, you had the word, ker, or we're going to say okra, in terms of kra because the name, and kra to say. In the tree language, we also have bijin, to name, and bidin, to call. And so that word din is actually going to be cognate with the word rin. And so we can see a grapheme of the word to call or to name, in Egyptian over here on the right-hand side, reading from right to left. And so in the Hebrew, we can show the same thing. And again, this is formatted not the way that I had it. And so what is on the bottom here will be over here on the right. But I just wanted to show that the same words for, like, shem is the word for name and fame. In Arabic, it's isim, name, fame. In the tree language, the cognate for that is asim, proclamation. In the Yoruba language, isum, proclamation. Fesum, report. In Swahili, sima, say or speech. And so the same word for name is the same word for speech or to say. And so here's another text, another word in the Egyptian language that has cognates in other languages that brings to mind all of this, or brings together these same concepts. So we have daruko in or daruko in the Yoruba language, and it means to mention the name of. In Arabic, there's a slight what we call metathesis between the K and the R sounds. So they say dakhara, to mention. In Assyrian, zikaru, to mention, to name. Hebrew, zekar, to remember. In Shikam, or in Egyptian, they say sakar, remembrance, memory, call to mind, to mention. So you got to understand how all of this is related. A name is the memory of somebody. And to name something is to invoke or to call on an entity, to mention it. But to call a name is to remember not only, of course, the name of the person, but to to the experience, to the character of the person of that which the name applies to. So that's why these words to remember, to mention the name are all connected. And so, you know, I see you, Brother Chief X. He says, you over my head, Asar. You're going to need to make this simple. I got autism. just hold on for a little bit, and you'll see how all of this ties in together. So remember that the name is comes from a root meaning to call or to invoke. And the same word for name becomes the word for soul. Because when we're talking about reincarnation, we're talking about the reincarnation of the soul of an individual. But you have to be able to define what a soul is. And so this is why the linguistic analysis allows us to put this in its proper context of what a soul is. And so people go around talking about the soul, but don't know what a soul is, because we don't speak African languages natively. And so this is what this aspect, you know, I know it's a little technical, but we have to get technical before we can start getting into the meat and start having discussions. And so this is often what happens in a lot of these Facebook discussions. They don't want to study and they don't want to do the technical work, but then they want to have deep conversations about things that require systematic study. And so this is something that you can't intuit. It's not going to come to you in a dream. You know, you can't get this through osmosis. You have to study. And there's no way around it. But so we're going to continue. So now that I put the linguistic and I have the sound laws in my book. So if anybody wants to doubt that that, you know, my comparisons are right and exact, the sound laws are established in the book. But I also cite in the book this text here is African religion defined, a systematic study of ancestor worship among the Akan. And so I want to show, because I heard a lot of, or excuse me, I've seen a lot of discussions want to talk about, you know, that this concept of reincarnation ain't in West Africa. Well, you can't get no more West African than the Akan. And we're going to show that exactly what I talked about is the case here. And this particular text backs up what we discovered via linguistics. And so this is from the chief priest and professor by the name of Dr. Anthony Ephraim Dancourt. He's actually a Ghanaian king who wrote this text about the Akan concept of and the study of ancestor worship again. And so he has a series of books that talks about the Akan religion and culture. And so I highly recommend for those who just need another reason to buy a book to put this into your library. So in this text, remember that we talked about the okra being cognate with the word, you know, kra or ker for soul in ancient Kemet. And so we're going to get a little bit of insight into the okra according to Dr. Dancourt. And so he says in his text, pages 54 through 55, 54 and 55, Kwame Gayeki, for example, maintains that the okra is located in the head, although in general, the Akan believe that the seat of the okra is the shoulders, or that the shoulders balance the soul in the head as the head. The seat of intelligence sits on the shoulders. Still, the fact is that to call anyone by name is to call the soul of that individual. And since the soul is an intangible agency, it is assumed that the dead has appeared in spirit. So when you invoke an ancestor's name, you invoke the soul of that person. And we'll find out later that the soul is the ancestor. And so what does that mean? That when you're talking about calling on your ancestors, all you're really calling on is their name. The soul is the name of the person. That is the ancestor. So we'll get into it. And so we see this statue of Horowibra from ancient Kemet, where you can see the okra on top of the head. And this is not by coincidence, because my text, again, is about paronymy. And so you have these texts, you have these words that sound alike, and because they sound alike or similar, the ancient Africans have synthesized these concepts. So it's no coincidence that in the Akan, the okra is seated in the head, because the okra has to deal with thoughts and to think about, to plot. And why on another aspect is on the shoulders, because you carry stuff on your shoulders, including your head. And so this is why this same root in the Egyptian is for to carry and to support. And you can see the determinative over here of a seated man carrying something on his head. And then, of course, the word Ka for soul, spirit, personality, essence, and Ka to say. And again, this is just totally messing up my my format here. So, originally these images is not overlapping on the text. So I apologize. But under that is the word for personality. So in this text, a separate text, traditional religion in West Africa, Modupe Odioye has an article in there. And on this page 283, he talks about the Kra or the Kla among the tree speakers. And so what he says is that we can think of Kra or Kla as consciousness, the part of a man that responds to a calling. And so when you're talking about a Kra, it's talking about a certain consciousness or energy that responds to a calling. And in my upcoming book, I'm going to show you how that relates to the concept of God in Africa, and in why the word God is accurate in terms of the meaning to call or to invoke. Because a God is a consciousness, is an energy that responds to a calling, responds to being invoked. And so we'll get into that. And anybody trying to argue other words don't know nothing about African culture. And they're just so anti-European that they think that this concept doesn't exist natively in Africa. And I'll demonstrate using nothing but African sources that is in fact not the case. So, the word fakad also, and I don't know why this H is behind here. Again, this formatting is doing something with my text, but anyway, it's the word, this symbol here is also pronounced cow cur. It's a cow's head. And so you can see that it also, the people try to imitate cow's horns. And you still see people in the Sudan do that to this day. They put their arms up in the air and they try to imitate cow horns. And so, yeah, so for Tamika Yevra, she says the Aleph, and it's really originally the Khalif, and I'll discuss that as well. So that word Aleph or Khalif is actually a borrowing from ancient Egyptian. It's a word for cow's head, and since the word for head also means leader, this is where you get, for example, the word Caliphate in Arabic, speaking about a leader, and ultimately where we get the word sheriff from in English. It all comes back to a word for a head, a cow's head, and the word for head synonymous being with the word for leader. But that's a conversation for another day. So as I demonstrated in another presentation that I did on the word nature, and actually the word nature and the word ka are actually the same word. But that's another discussion. I already have that up on YouTube if you want to watch it. It was my presentation for the for ASCAC for this year earlier. That was held in where was it? It was held here in Philly this year. And so I did it on the word nature. Then I showed that the word nature and the word kra or kra are all the same word. But anyway, but the point of this slide is to show you that the word for God comes from the same root for speech. And we see this both in Chiluba and in Chikam, which is the ancient Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, and all the other languages that comprise the ancient Egyptian. And so there's a relationship, again, between the word for speech and the word for spirit, and to make and to do and things of that nature. They're homonyms and in many respects homographs. And so I won't get into it too much here, but I just wanted to highlight that for y'all. And so again, the word ka is soul and spirit. There's really no difference between the soul and the spirit in Africa. These are just different words in English that try to make, saying different, but they're the exact same in the African languages. And so that word ka or okra in Egyptian is the word for spirit and soul. It's also the word for to say and name. The same thing in Chiluba, from the root ilelela, to make or to do, comes the word for God. But you also, from that same word ila, to speak, comes ikula, talk, utterance, express. And all of these concepts are related. And so I wanted to show here that the word okra or kra, again, these concepts are connected. So from the concept of to say comes the concept for name and personality, and from the concept of to be powerful in things comes the word for spirit. They're actually separate words, but because they sound alike, paronymy forces them to synthesize these concepts. And so from the concept of being powerful comes the word for work and also the word for bull. And so that's why you see in the ancient Egyptian, for example, the image that we saw earlier of Horimimbra, I forgot how you pronounce it, that he's imitating the cow's or bull's head with the arms on top of his head. And you can see how all of these things correlate, And so, again, you can, when revisiting this, pause this if you want to take a longer look, at it. And so what I discuss in the book is that the word ker or kra for name in ancient Egyptian, in another dialect or another language, came the word rin for name. The word ka or khan and the word rin are the exact same word. It's just a process in linguistics that we call palatalization, that the K sound became R through an intermediate stage of Z. So ker, ch, or j to Z to R. And so it's cognate with the word in Tree jin, name, or they'll say zin. In the Shilluk, in the Sudan, they say rin. In Gawke, Adamawa, rin. In Pormi, rin. In Gumi, rin. Panjama, rin. Mbe, len. In common Bantu is Rina, Lena, Dina, Ina. And keep in mind this word Ina is going to be important later on in our discourse. Jinna, Zina, Zin, etc. Proto-Bantu Jinna name, in the Zande Rimo and Sango Iri name. And so this is the depiction of the word Rin in the hieroglyphs over here in this top corner. And notice the cartouche again. So this lets me know again that the word Shinu is also the word for name. And so this is the determinative for, this is a determinative. There's other determinatives and some without the determinative. But this is just one of many determinatives for the word Rin. So Shin and Rin are dialectical variants of the same word. And so is, the Ker. And so that nasalized uvular trill just went full nasal and became in these dialects that gave these variations of the word. So why is this important in terms of Rin? As Dr. Alan Anselin, in his article, Some Notes About an Early African Pool of Cultures from Which Emerged the Egyptian Civilization, has noted that same word for Ren is also the same word for spirit and spirit double or shadow in African languages. And so you can find this article in a book called Egypt in its African Context, Proceedings of the Conference held at the Manchester Museum, University of Manchester, in October of 2009. So it's a group of Egyptologists who met to talk about ancient Egypt in its African context. And so these are the proceedings. So this is a younger version of Dr. Alan Anselin, and he has his own journal, or he's the head of a journal coming out of the Caribbean. And so a top-notch journal, many Egyptologists are published in there, and he does a lot of good work. But this is a younger picture. It's hard to find a more recent picture of him. Anyway, so as he noted in the text page, I forgot to put the page number in there, but believe me, it's in there. Matter of fact, I could just look on my other page. I got it up already. Let me get the page number, because I don't like citing anything without page numbers. I don't want y'all thinking I make up anything. So that's not how we do in scholarship. So it's going to be on page 50 of the text that I mentioned. So on page 50 of that text, Egypt in its African context, if you can find it, that's excuse me, that's the page that you'll find it. So he noticed in Proto-Nilotic, so he's going into Nilotic languages. So this tells me that the Nilotic languages is where the ancient Egyptians got this word Ren from. So Ka or Ker is the original for ancient Egyptian, and the word Ren is a borrowing. But they're both the same word. So in Proto-Nilotic, Karen. In Western Nilotic, in the Luo language, Nuer and Shilluk, Ren, name. We mentioned Shilluk already. In the Dinka language, Ren, name, reputation. In Western Chadic, Ren, shadow and spirit, as an element of the personality, distinct from Shem, name, honor, and fame in the Semitic languages. And so, but ironically, actually the word Shem, where we get the word Semitic from in the first place, is actually a dialectical variant of the same name. So that's a different discussion altogether in itself. So in Mupin, Ren, shadow of a person, the spirit. Kare Kare, Reni, shadow, one senses, thinking clearly. In the Bokos, Ren, spirit. So the word Ren is not only the name, it is also the word for spirit, or one shadow or spirit double. So that's why it's a different, like when you're reading the ancient Egyptian text, the Ren has a spiritual component attached to the person. And so they creatively synthesized the Ka, the Ren, the Khat, and other aspects, the Ba, you know, and created a whole new paradigm from these distinct language groups who came together and merged on the Nile. And so we call that syncretism, just like how the Africans synchronized African religions in Christianity in the Caribbean and in South America to give us Golden Blade and Palo and all these other different synthesis, Haitian Voodoo and things of that nature. So keep that in mind. So when you're talking about the Ren, you're talking about not only the name, but the spirit and soul of a person, just like the Ka or the Okra, as we mentioned earlier. And so in many African languages, especially in Bantu, the R in the word Ren has been dropped. And so they only say Ina. They say Ina as far as the name is concerned. And we're going to have a citation about the Ina, which is going to demonstrate and prove that among the Amazulu, it's the same thing that we find in these Nilotic and Chadic languages in terms of the Ren, in terms of it being a spirit and a shadow or spirit double, just like the Ka. So, but I want to get into kind of the spiritual context of what a name is in the African context. And so I want to hop over to West Africa and Mali and Burkina Faso among the Dogon people. And so this citation comes from the Pale Fox, which is from Griole, originally. I forgot what year it was originally written in, but the English version, the translation came out in 1965. So on page 113, he says, it is a well-known fact that one cannot mention the name of one who is absent without bringing about considerable effects in the unseen world. The usual explanation of this phenomenon is that the mention of a name invokes the being whose name it is. So by mentioning someone's name, you invoke the name. You make appear the entity for which the name is attached. That's what he's saying, and compels it to appear, as I just said, though its presence may be unwelcome. But nothing is said about the reason why the being should hasten to answer the summons of its name. The reason is that to utter a name is to bring into existence a form and habitation. So a name is associated with the bringing into being of some kind of entity, and to give it form. And so what I argue ultimately is that it quantizes energy and consciousness in terms of the philosophy and metaphysics of many African groups and across Africa, whether it's West, Central, or East Africa. The best form and the most suitable habitation to receive the life force, so it's associated with a type of force, again, a type of energy of the being invoked. In uttering the word, the speaker no doubt projects a force of his own, which is carried on the breath issuing from his mouth and is in fact one with it. But this force merely represents the force of the one invoked. It offers it a form and a voice. This form, which will be the best suited to the one who is called, traps, as it were, his life force, compelling him to appear, to arise in answer to the call. So remember the citation from Oduyoye when he talking about the Kra and the Kla among the tree speakers and the Akan. He says that the Kra or Kla has to deal with, matter of fact, I'm just going to go back to that particular post so I can cite it correctly. He says, we can then think of Kra or Kla as consciousness, the part of a man that responds to a calling. So we can see that this is reinforced, and we got to remember that the Dogon are cousins to the Akan people. So when we talk about the Dagara, the Akan, the Ashanti, and all of those in that area, the Bambara, they're all related people. So all these concepts exist amongst them, and we see the same thing in ancient Kemet. So when you call a name, it traps and arrests a consciousness and or entity, or as it were, a life force, and it brings it into being. It summons it from the fluidity of the infinity, so to speak. So now we're going to jump back to the book African Religion Defined by Dr. Ephraim Dancor. So he's going to give us some more insights into the Okra. And so this is all on page 51. So I have some things highlighted and bolded and colored for emphasis. So he says, to worship a soul suggests that the soul is an agency that acquired a superhuman capability far beyond anything that a human can imagine. Therefore, since a soul is an intangible agency of a living person, the only way to associate a soul with a deceased person is through the name that one bequeaths to the succeeding generations. Again, equating the soul to a name. In this vein, when descendants or those believing in a particular ancestral name meet for religious or a political event, they invoke, praise, honor, or sacrifice to the dead ancestor in whose name they gather. In other words, when one speaks of a soul and a name, one is referring to the same agency, especially since a name, like a soul, is also an intangible agency. To have a name is to have a soul, and vice versa. Therefore, as long as the dead are remembered, the ancestors, though dead, are alive and well. Actually, the names of the dead are that which survived death, depending on how powerful those names or souls are. They influence the course of events for their living descendants. Ancestor worship, then, is simply the worship of names, souls of dead ancestors by living descendants. I hope what I read was clear. Again, reinforcing what the linguistics tells us, that the soul is the name of a person, and that the name comes from a root meaning to call or to invoke, to say. So this is why there's a relationship between the manifestation of names and ancestors when you call upon them. This is why in ceremonies we call upon the names of our ancestors, so that their souls will live on and on and on. Next slide. This is from Ronald Leprechaun in a text called The Great Name, Ancient Egyptian Royal Titulary. He says on page 6, in the end, it was a family's duty to keep the memory of a deceased relative alive, as the ubiquitous phrase in Egyptian, to cause the name to live. And that's the word over here in this in parentheses, Sa'ank Rin. Causative, live. Cause to live, name. Cause the name to live. That's what this phrase means. Was applied to one's father, mother, or grandfather. We even encounter a brother causing his sibling's name to live. So again, when they want the name or the soul, because remember, the soul is the name. When they want the soul to live, they stress to the living to invoke their names. And I didn't put it in the slide here, but in the book, I give a primary source and citation with transliteration and translation of an example of that in the ancient Egyptian culture. Now, I'm gonna skip down here to South Africa. This is a text called Ndaba, My Children, African Folk Tales by the shaman Vuzumazulu Kredumutwa. Hold on one sec. Okay, so this is him over here in the corner. So he's a Zulu shaman. And so this is a series of texts that are actually folk tales, initiatory tales from his many different initiations. So he's not only initiated in the Zulu wisdom tradition, he's initiated in many Bantu initiation systems. He traveled the superhighway of wisdom in Africa and was initiated into several different groups. And so a lot of their stories are in this text. But in this text, he takes a pause and he starts describing Bantu religion. And he starts going into his own initiation in the Zulu wisdom tradition. And this is where we're going to pick off, or we're going to pick up, you know, for this aspect in terms of these next two slides, because one of the elders, he's writing in the text what his elders told him regarding certain concepts in their tradition, and said, and so his elder, his initiatory elder, is speaking to him right now in the text. So this is from page 570 to 571. Urge the people, O my son, urge them always to slaughter a goat or a cow for the helpless spirits of their ancestors. Tell them that a man who tries to live without his ancestors is like a tree struggling without his roots, and that a man who is ignored by his ancestors is a disgrace in the eyes of the gods. His conscience will haunt him until his dying day, and he will die weeping like a lost hyena in the darkness. My son, you know that when a man sacrifices regularly to his ancestors, the Innas leave the land of forever night. So remember that word inna that I talked about earlier? That word inna is the word rin or rina. And as I mentioned, in certain Bantu languages, the R is dropped. And so they just have inna. So this is this word. So this word inna is the soul or the spirit or what becomes the ancestors. So that's why he says, my son, you know that when a man sacrifices regularly to his ancestors, the innas leave the land of forever night, which is the ancestral realm, and come to live in that man's kraal always. And so, you know, the Zulu are a semi-pastoralist group. So they have kraals. These are areas where you store or you house your cattle. They live there and repay his adherents by protecting him and his children and wives from harm, by interceding with the gods on his behalf, and by giving him luck in all he does. They also help him by sending him advice by dreams, messages in his hour of trouble. They not only shield him from harm, they make him the dread of his enemies. So now we're going to continue on the inner. The inner must eat to grow and live, the same as you must eat to grow and live. While you live, you eat for both you, your body, and for your inner, meaning your inner is your shadow. But when you die, your inner will also die unless it can continue to eat. If we do not sacrifice cows and goats regularly so that the inners of these animals can go to feed our ancestors' spirit. Remember, I bolded this because they're equating the inner, the word for name, with the ancestor spirit. So when you invoke the ancestors, you're invoking their spirit double, which is their name. They will go into a state of non-existence. Our ancestor spirits must remain alive because we must regularly ask their advice about problems we encounter. And they must take our problems we encounter, and they must take our problems and plead for us with the gods, just as the common people must have the Indunas who can plead for them with the chiefs. So again, the inner is the spirit double. It is what, when you call on your ancestors, you're calling on the spirit double of one who lived beforehand. But the spirit double, the shadow of a person, is their name. Now, we're going to jump up a little bit and go to the Kipsigis, a branch of the Collagen-speaking people that's scattered, you know, throughout parts of East Africa, including Kenya, Tanzania, Sudan, and Ethiopia, and Uganda. So this book here, the Kipsigis, by J.Q. or John Q. Orchardson, he talks about this concept called the Kuranit amongst the Kipsigis or the Collagen. So he says, when a child is born, it is given two names, one of which refers to his or her Kuranit. That is the name, that is the man or woman who, when living, embodied the spirit which enters into the newborn child. I'm going to read that again, a little bit slower. When a child is born, it is given two names, one of which refers to his or her Kuranit. That is the man or woman who, when living, embodied the spirit which enters into the newborn child. So they say that the spirit of an ancestor enters a newborn child via the name. Because remember that the name is the ancestor. It is the spirit. So this is from 1961 on page 45 of this text. So now let's get some clarity. So this is actually what I wrote in Nsw.t Bjt.j. The word Kuranit or Karnit, from the word Karna, name, describes a person named after a departed soul. Therefore, the reincarnation name. And there's my source. As stated previously, by naming the child the name of a deceased relative, the collagen thus reincarnate, Kuranit, the soul, name equals Karna, of that deceased relative. I lost my place. Thereby perpetuating the spirit of the ancestors in subsequent generations. The online collagen dictionary renders Kuranit as Kuranit, and I don't even know how to pronounce that really differently, which is the reincarnation name, and notes that this term is analyzed as kur, call, and ne, know, recognize. So I suggest that therefore kurinit means the known calling or remembrance or to know the name or be made aware of a deceased relative. It can be more accurately be defined as the process of calling back the name of a relative that one knows, a name that is still in the collective memory. So you keep your ancestors alive by naming your children after the ancestors. And so the idea is that by naming your children the names of your ancestors, they become the embodiment, that spirit that is associated with that name comes to flesh and manifests itself in the child. And so this word kurinit, or from the word kur, is the same word as the word ka or ka in ancient Egyptian. Matter of fact, this is a group who are descendants from ancient Egyptians. So this is Dr. Kipkoech Sambu, who I mentioned in the text before. And so he has 2 books out. The College and People's Egypt Origin Legend Revisited was Isis Asis, and the Misiri Legend Explored, a linguistic inquiry into the College and People's oral tradition of ancient Egyptian origin. So, and I actually have an interview with him on my channel. So you can scroll somewhere and find or look him up. And we have an in-depth discussion about a lot of these concepts about the collagen and things of that nature. So in the text on page 164, he says this: a man or a woman who dies will have his or her soul recalled back to life on earth through a baby being born subsequent to his or her death. Such a baby must be born to a man of the deceased person's Nsw.t, which is, his house, basically. The child assumes the deceased person's name and sometimes even the character. This is to be expected as the child's guardian angel who guides it through the do's and don'ts of Ma'at. It is the deceased after whom it is named or whose soul it is carrying. So see how the name is associated with the soul among the collagen? So we had the same thing in ancient Kemet, the same thing in amongst Bantu speakers, especially among the Amazulu, and the same thing amongst the Dogon and the Akan. So this is this is actually a Chiena Intu concept that is spread all across Africa for these language groups that are related. So this isn't happenstance. So let me continue. This is to be expected as the child's guardian angel who guides it through the do's and don'ts of Ma'at. Is the deceased after whom it is named or whose soul it is carrying, and the quality of the duplicate cannot be better than its original. The deceased double is continuously guiding its living duplicate. Remember, you see this word here? I should have highlighted that. The deceased double, because the soul is the double of the person who once lived. And the double is your name. For the latter reason, criminals, other social misfits, and economic failures when they die are customarily not recalled back to life on earth by way of reincarnation. Such departed social misfits are the ones who go to hell. So you gotta understand, amongst the collagen people, the collagen people don't believe necessarily in a heaven, but they believe in a kind of a hell. And for them, hell is not being reborn in your lineage. So those who are not being renamed by their descendants are people who have bad names. They lived a bad life, so that name has a bad spirit, a bad energy about it. So we don't invoke those names. We don't bring back to life. We don't recall those names back. And so those souls, remember what we said about the inner. They just go back into the ether and go into an existence of nothingness, or a non-existence, to be exact. And for the collagen people, that is what hell is. Not to be recalled, not to have your name live on. Now, there's a text called Egypt and the Mountains of the Moon. I'm actually holding it in my hand, but I guess you really can't see it. But anyway, it's out of print. It's a rare book by FDP Wicker. Excuse me, had to take a drink. Now, in this text, all he's doing, and this is a white man, so this isn't a radical Afrocentrist, quote unquote, but this man here has been, all he was doing is connecting ancient Egyptian through anthropology, through flora, through plants, through language, etc., arguing that the ancient Egyptians came from the Great Lakes region in Central Africa. That's why it's called Egypt and the Mountains of the Moon. But in this text, he says here, examination of the nomina, or the names, or son of Ra names of the pharaohs reveals that the Egyptian royal families followed a custom that is still common among many of the Bantu tribes of Eastern and Southern Africa. You know, I'm going to start killing folks with this relationship between Egypt and Chibantu. So I'm giving you a little taste early. That's another set of arguments and defeats that will come in when this other book is released in January. This not only, excuse me, oh my bad, let me go back. Examination of the nomina or son of Ra names of the pharaohs reveals that the Egyptian royal families followed a custom that is still common among many of the Bantu tribes of Eastern and Southern Africa, and is commonly referred to as alternation of generations. This not only involves naming heirs after their grandfather, but also regards the grandson as a sort of clone of the grandparent, and includes a spiritual identity as though the Ka adopted the new generation. One result of such belief is that a man has a personal identity with all of his brothers and with his male first cousins on his father's side of the family. In the days when life expectancy was so short, few men could have known their grandfather. And this practice may have arisen from a belief in the grandfather's reincarnation. So again, associating the Ka is a name. You know, like we talk about the Ka of Ra, it's a soul name. It's the reincarnation name of someone. And so to name someone after a deceased ancestor is to reincarnate them. We're seeing the same thing over and over again, no matter where we go. So now we're gonna hop back to the Congo. So, you know, one of my favorite scholars to cite, Dr. Kimbadinde Kiabonseki Fukiao, out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, a Kikongo speaker. He's written several texts, a few which you can see over here on the right. The text that we're going to cite below is from Self-Healing Power and Therapy. So he's talking about the Bakongo people, and we're going to see that they have a similar concept. So remember that from Wicker, that these concepts exist still among the Bantu speaker. So he mentioned more so in East Africa. This is more Central West Africa. So this is a common thing amongst the Bantu speakers in general. But hold on, excuse me. Okay, so before we go to Fukiao's text, I'm gonna cite what I cited. So this is what I wrote in Nsw.t. So another African testimony regarding the reincarnation of the soul through the name of a deceased relative can be seen among the Bantu Congo, as told to us through Fukiao in his text, Self-Healing Power and Therapy, Old Teachings from Africa. In discussing the maternal naming rules of the Bantu Congo, Fukiao informs us that the mother's name is never used as a formal name to her own son or daughter. The mother's name can only be used as a formal name by daughters of her daughters, for as long as the name is remembered. So instead of using the word reincarnation, if people don't like that, we can use also as synonymous the alternation of generations. So that's what he's describing here amongst the Bantu Congo, which Wicker stated, you know, for the East African Bantu speakers. So this is what he's saying. So a mother can't give her child the same name, but the daughter can give her daughter her name. Because again, remember that grandparents weren't expected to live as long when these traditions first lived. The life expectancy was short. So very few people would know their grandparents. So the mother's name can only be used as a formal name by daughters of her daughters for as long as the name is remembered. Remember that concept of remembering names. This unique naming process is called Indukulu or Intumbudolo, which derive from the verbs luka and tumbula, respectively, both meaning to make alive one's root ancestor's name. Respectively, both meaning to make alive one root's ancestor's name in Kikongo, just like Kuranit, reincarnation name in Collagen. As it regards this process of Indukulu, we are informed that, now I'm gonna cite Fukiao. Fukiao says, the process involves formalities, ceremonies, rituals, taboos, dance, and teachings. The bearer of such a name of Indukulu is the Indusi, therefore the made alive by name, or the root ancestor living in the community within a young body. The process itself is also seen as a technical strategy to reinforce matrilinealism among the matrilineal societies and patrilinealism, messing this up, among the patrilineal societies. From this childhood and Indusi, the made alive, has all formal and legal relationships with the community. Respect, honor, and address due to the root ancestor whose name he or she bears. So we make alive through the naming of our children the ancestors. That's all reincarnation is. The naming your children of the ancestors. So we see this. So I have cited sources in West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, East Africa, and of course for Northeast Africa in terms of ancient Kemet. And so this is a widespread phenomenon. It is from this concept that any other expansion on the concept derives. Reincarnation is the naming of the children of the ancestors, after ancestors. So you make alive the ancestors by naming your children ancestral names. So another text, so we're going to go into Nigeria on this one. So the concept of Urhi and eschatology from the author M.Y. Nabofa. Now this word Urhi here is cognate with the word Ori. So for those of us who are Ifa practitioners, when we talk about our Ori, the word Ori is a homonym of the word Ori, meaning head. But the word Ori is a spirit double. And that's your really that comes from it may actually come from the same concept as the name, but it's definitely your spirit double in Nigeria. And so for this group, it is called the Urhi. And so I cite in my text, hold on. I doubled the what did I do? I doubled the, hold on one sec. I forgot to copy and paste the actual citation. So I'm just going to read it. And so I'm just going to, so y'all won't get distracted. So y'all just have to kind of listen to me. You won't be able to read it. So hold on one sec. I'm looking for it in my book. So let me scroll up a little bit. Apologize for this. Okay. So what I say is when a soul is reincarnated via an ancestral name, it is more so the qualities of the name and or the qualities and characteristics of the person who once possessed the name. That is being transferred to the new child. This concept is alive among the Urhobo, the Urhobo of Nigeria. M.y. Nabofa, in his article Urhi and Eschatology, provides us with some insightful commentary as it regards the Urhobo concept of Urhi, which is defined as guardian spirit, which reincarnates and is worshipped as an ancestor. So now I'm actually going to cite Dr. Nabofa. And so this for it's an article or a chapter in this text, Traditional Religion in West Africa. So the citation is on page 312. So so from 312 of this text here that I have here comes this term. So he says, however, it has been said that it is the qualities of the departed ancestors that reincarnate. As these qualities or characteristics are spiritual, they could be absorbed or imbibed by as many children as possible. Hence, when more than one child absorbed the qualities of an ancestor, it could be rightfully said that the ancestor has actually reincarnated in several people. It is the spiritual qualities of the person that are believed to reincarnate, but not his Urhi, which remains in Erevin, which is heaven for them as an ancestor. It joins other Irhi, which is the plural of Erhi, which form the core of the cult of ancestors. End quote. So, you know, when it's not a physical substance that incarnates, it is the qualities associated with the name that reincarnates. And so this word Erhi is what's cognate with Ori in the Yoruba language. And so when you die, what people will be worshiping is your Ori. Among the Urhobo, it is their Erhi. Erhi. The H sounds are dropped for comparative words in Yoruba with other African languages. But this pretty much ends my presentation. So I just wanted to give these citations and to inform and give another perspective on this concept of reincarnation in African traditions. And so, as you can see, I have cited many different traditions, and they all have the same words, variations of the same ancestral word that we can reconstruct back to the you know, Chiena Intu post-classic stage of Chiena Intu. And so all of these groups are linguistically related, and so these concepts that are inherent in the culture are present because of their relationship, their relatedness to a proto-culture that existed sometime in the past. And so I hope I brought some clarity to this concept and expanded our understanding of what reincarnation is, primarily in Africa. And so this is why it's important to really study, especially initiatory text, and to study the languages of the concept. It's not enough to just practice to be a practitioner. If you were an EFOP practitioner and you talking about your Ori and stuff, you would not know about any of this because it's just part of the tradition. You have to systematically study and use the different tools of research to get to the heart and to see how this stuff is transferred down from generation to generation. So I hope that this, again, has been, beneficial to you all. And, if any of you have any questions or any comments in the chat, I'll now be looking to see if you do. But in the meantime, would like some feedback from our brother Bujawu, if you have any.
Okay.
I can hear you now, I guess.
Okay. I'm hearing an echo.
Let me just mute mine if that's okay.
All right. Yeah, I don't have much to actually say. That was, I mean, like I said, I read the chapter that you wrote about, and it's just I think that's a thorough job, and I think that definitely brings a lot of information to the table for people to definitely. It will actually force people to consider it, as you said. Actually, as you told me before we even began, which I think is a good point, and you said something to it, but I'm going to underscore it, which is that when cultures have different traditions and practices within it, we have to be careful to make sure we, as at least as scientists, we have to define things first, which means we have to identify what it is that we are observing and who is actually doing it, and then be careful not to transpose it into other areas where it doesn't belong. And so linguistics and the work, especially what you showed, allows us to at least begin or form a more scientific basis or a factual basis to do the work to see, okay, if two different groups have related languages and we could determine the proximity of those relationships between the languages, then that means the cultures that we see them practicing today also may be at one point from a same ancestral common parent. And then we can form theories or explanations as to why we see the similarities between the practices, and also we can respect the differences. And so I think, what you were doing it is important, because on the subject of reincarnation, now we know they didn't use the actual word reincarnation in that form, but what's being described as reincarnation, we can see it in various different cultures, and we can start relating and putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So names being one aspect of the idea of reincarnation, and I mean I think you just kind of hit it out the park with that one. So I don't have anything to add. I'm just giving really a summation of what I see as important that people should definitely consider, and any discussions on this is forcing people who are going to have to consider it. Like after this video, especially being archived, and then you already crystallize it in your book.
Yeah.
If people bring up reincarnation, they're going to have to talk about this aspect of it. There's no way around that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say and why there's like such a big argument around it, and so in this respect, the concept of reincarnation, or the alternation of generations, as we should say, which I think actually it or it expands, how we should view, this concept, is very much different from what you would find in the Hindu tradition. But there are some groups that have something similar to what the Hindu tradition has, but needless to say, this even this discussion is important, because this, as I mentioned previously, the concept of knowing what a God is related to this, because the same word for God is the same word to caller and to invoke, not only in English, but in Africa, in ancient Kemet, in in amongst the Akan, amongst the Bantu speakers, or whatnot. And so when you're talking about a God, is this energy or force that responds to a calling that can be invoked to do things. This is why in the story that I cited in the text of Isis and Ra, why Ra wouldn't give up his name, because to know the name of the spirit is to be able to control it, to make it a zombie in a sense and force it to do what you want it to do, because you have command, you have power over the spirit. That's what a heka is. It is the command of spirit. That's why they call it magical spirit or magical speech, because it has the ability to force the spirits to invoke the spirits to do certain tasks. And so this relationship of what a god, a Netcher, a Kulu, and Nkole, and all of that other good stuff, and Orisha, all of that is it's the same fundamental aspect. And so but more of that aspect will be discussed in Aluja Volume 2, hopefully to be released in January of 2019. And so, you know, let me see if there's any questions. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think a few people have some good questions, but I just wanted to say this, that I also noticed that when I look at this question and I'm surveying, you know, the ancient Kemet and the different areas of focus in my research and things I come across, it's very important not to leave out what you just discussed with the aspect of the name, but I think people even have to understand the particular ethnic group or culture that you're talking about, of course, and if there's a commonality among many, but the concept of the person itself, the personhood of the human being has to be known on a subject of reincarnation, of what tumbles down, if, because you know people say, okay, reincarnation is the rebirth or the coming back, but even in that sense you have to understand, okay, well, what exactly would be doing that? So you have to understand the breakdown of the anatomy of the personhood or of the human being based on that particular culture that you're studying or focused on. So I think that and on Facebook, at least in the conversation, I didn't see that come up too much. So I think that's something that was left out, that definitely has to be there.
But that's why I made sure I ended it with that citation about the Urhobo people in Nigeria, because he put some clarity on it, and that is like the spirit stays in the spirit world, but what's really reincarnated is the qualities for which the name is associated with. So that's why you name your children the ancestor name, so that the name will live in the ancestral world, but the qualities is what you want to be associated with your children. And that's why, and this kind of answers Lessa Darcy's question, not everyone is named after ancestors. And so certain that, for example, what I mentioned amongst the collagen, certain people who had bad character, their names aren't invoked anymore. And so that's their concept of hell, to not be reborn, to not have your name be remembered by your future generations, your descendants. So if your name is not remembered, then you die out, basically. And that's what's hell for them. Now, she says specifically, this assumes that every ancestor had spiritual qualities to be remembered. If that's the case, why so many of poor character nowadays? Now, keep in mind, as I said on my Facebook Live video the other day, you have to be able to separate things when you're doing your studies. There is the information that is accurate as it regards a particular tradition. So everything that we described here is accurate as far as the tradition is concerned. Whether what they believe in the tradition is true or not, that's a totally different part of the research project. So just because Africans believe that they can somehow embed the spirit of once deceased ancestors by naming their children after the ancestors, whether that is a true to life scientific fact has yet to be determined. So in our research process, if we wanted to see if this was, actually the case, we would have to conduct some research, which of course would have to be an ongoing project, because we would have to wait for people to live and die and document, what happens throughout the lives of these individuals. And this would have to happen over several generations for us to say whether this is scientific or not. But just because Africans say it doesn't mean it's true. So you can name your children after certain ancestors, and they can still have bad character and bad qualities, because who we are isn't predetermined. Who we are is based upon our experiences, how we respond to the challenges of our environment as we age. What city, what culture, what language do we speak? All of that plays a role into the personality of the person. So just naming somebody that is not going to guarantee that these aspects are going to be present in the person. So just because I name my son Michael Jordan does not mean that without any kind of training whatsoever, that he's just going to be able to dunk from half court and play for the Chicago Bulls. It doesn't work like that.
He said dunk from half court.
And so, we got to separate those things. We have the accurate description of the tradition, the philosophy and thought, but just because we can describe it accurately in this sense doesn't mean that what they believe is true at all. This could all be a bunch of hogwash, or it could be true. But until you put it through scientific scrutiny, all we have is a description of a belief system. So me presenting this information is simply to inform people about the widespreadness of this belief in thought and practice in many different African traditions, with the earliest recorded being in ancient Kemet. And so I hope I answered that.
I think that's important because as a scientist doing science, I think that's one of the first steps to accurately describe the truthfulness of a thing will come later. You have to kind of define and like, you have to, even in law, you have to define your terms at the beginning of a contract. You have to define your terms. You have to do all the definitions, define things, set the scope, and then you proceed forward. So I think that's important. A learning lesson for people to accurately describe something. We don't know if it's true, but we're actually describing at least what is done or what is believed or what is said and spoken in these different communities. Then we can move to see, okay, is it objective, universal truth? Can we, can we test it? Can we falsify it? Can we, all that good stuff?
Yep. I mean, I don't really see any questions. Just a few random comments. And so, and one of the things I want to kind of expound on again is that one of the things in the book by Ephraim Dancourt, he kind of highlights, and what you kind of see in ancient Egypt is that, again, there's a belief in many African traditions that to call upon the name of the ancestor keeps them alive. Matter of fact, I'll just read from the ancient Egyptian text itself. Let's see. It's explicitly stated. So again, this is in my book, and there's a woman by the name of Nsw.t, and in her declaration of virtues, which was done in the New Kingdom period from between 1550 and 1069 BCE. After blessings from the divinities and an appeal to the living for offerings and remembrance through pronouncing her name, she says, and I'm just reading from my book. So now I'm gonna get into what she actually says. So hopefully what I read comes through. So she says, doing good is not difficult. Just speaking good is a monument. For indeed, one who does it for another is actually doing it for himself. I am a woman worthy of being praised, a woman worthy of being honored, one who set out the way and traveled on the way of the honored ones, one who put devotion to God in her heart when she was a child and has held firm her whole life, one true of heart to the gods and goddesses, a true daughter of her father, one generous in gifts to one who said, would that I had about anything, wholesome of character, good of disposition, great of love with everyone, straightforward with the rich, and just to the poor, one who still helps the living with her precepts and the poor with her property. So even though she's dead, she's still helping the living with her precepts, with her wisdom, and the poor with her property. So she gave all of her riches to the poor as an inheritance. So even in the afterlife, she's still serving the people. Now, I request of you nothing except the mere breath of your mouth. She's talking to the living now. Well, she's been talking to the living, but she's more specifically addressing us who are living, who can read her text. So now I request of you nothing except the mere breath of your mouth. For those who are yonder in the ancestral realm live when their names are pronounced. And I have that boldened in the text. For those who are yonder live when their names are pronounced. And surely he who is doing something for others is actually doing it for himself. Indeed, it is the monument to say a good deed, and this is not an exaggeration, nor is it a granite slab on your arms. He who glorifies me, his name will be remembered. For everyone who acts for others, the same is done for him. And it is done according to what was done before, since the time of the God till today. Surely Ra rises and sees and repays a deed to one who does it. May he place it, the good deed, in your hearts. This august God, this prince great of love, whom I have served the earth. So the point of this is that by doing good works and serving the people, this is a reason for people to remember your name. So when you see all of these declarations of innocence and declaration of virtues and these big elaborate tombs and statues of people, that is so the living can remember them. Because if the living remembers them and continues to call their names, the ancestors live in the ancestral realm. So that's one way to keep your ancestors living. Of course, providing sacrifices, as discussed by Credu Mutwa amongst the Amazulu, is another way to keep your ancestors living. And the other way to keep your ancestors living is to reincarnate them by giving your children the names of those esteemed ancestors. So Darquar talks about basically the same thing amongst the Akan, and especially upon the kingship, and why amongst there's always these fights to become kings in these traditions, because a king automatically, by virtue of his office, becomes an eternal ancestor. Not everyone becomes a great ancestor. They have to be initiated into, and they have to have done all these good deeds. So not everyone makes it and has a big name to be remembered. Not everyone's going to be Malcolm X. Not everyone's going to be Martin Luther King Jr. Not everyone's going to be Harriet Tubman. We still call on their names because of what they did for the people. So their spirits, their souls live. And there are other people who name their children Harriet and Malcolm and Martin because of what they did, with the same intentions that we see in the concepts in which we have cited already, in hopes that some of that essence will be absorbed and embedded in the character of the person in whom the child is named after. So we still do these traditions today. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to add that that brings into mind, a lot of times you'll see an epithet after the Shenu that you spoke about of the king, where we will see it says Nsw.t Bjt.j, which means live like Ra forever. And so and also it kind of puts a thought on the aspect of why certain people's names were erased and scratched out.
Exactly.
In text. I mean, in the inscriptions and things throughout Kemet, different people's names were taken away and taken out. I mean, I know it's referred to by some scholars, it's ancestral suffocation, because you actually suffocate in the afterward, and it kind of leans into another conversation about the statues and things being disfigured,
Exactly,
and the noses and things being.
But remember what Lady Ta said. Now I request of you nothing except the mere breath of your mouth. So that she's showing the association between the breath and the name. So I don't know if one remembers, I read earlier from the Pale Fox. Hold on. It is well known that one cannot mention the name of one who is absent without bringing about considerable effects in the unseen world. The usual explanation of this phenomenon is that the mention of a name invokes the being whose name it is and compels it to appear, though its presence may be unwelcome. But nothing is said about the reason why the being should hasten to answer the summons of his name. The reason is that to utter a name is to bring into existence a form and a habitation, the best form and the most suitable habitation to receive the life force of the being invoked. In uttering the word, the speaker no doubt projects a force of his own, which is carried on the breath issuing from his mouth and is in fact one with it. So there's a connection between the breath and, of course, the mentioning of the name. And so actually, if you have the book by Griole, Conversations with Olga Tameli, Olga Tameli starts giving you the relationship between breath and speech, and even saliva and water, because the original text has to deal with the god of water. That's in French, it's worded that way, but in English, they changed the name to Conversations with Olga Tameli. But that's a central concept in the philosophy, the ontology of these two traditions, which is also I can say authoritatively that this is also in the Bantu speaking communities as well. And so when the association of, of course, the act of carving out names on monuments ensures that the generations that didn't live in that time who come back will not be able to utter their names. In other words, to keep the spirits and the souls alive. And the same thing with the nose, because remember, the statues are what are the houses of the spirits. And so you invoke a spirit, and it is believed that this spirit will come down and reside in the statue. And so it, you know, the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was originally done at the entrances of temples and for statues, the purpose of that was for the dead spirit to regain its faculties, its speech, its ability to breathe and eat, and other things that it would do as a normal human. So when you carve out and chop off the nose, it stops from breathing. As you said, it suffocates them. They're trying to kill somebody has an angst. In modern times, especially all of us who come from the West Coast of the United States and grew up in gang culture, you know, when somebody's name is on the wall and they in a rival gang and we don't like that Negro, we spray their name out so nobody remembers their name.
That's in New York. Tags, and you know the whole hip hop B Street. It's in the movie B Street. Between I forgot the name of the character now. Wow. But that was one of the themes inside the movie.
Yep. And so it's very disrespectful to spray paint another gang member's name off the wall. But it's in the same spirit as what you find in ancient Egypt when them chopping off the noses and carving out the names on the walls.
And I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and that I hope people are understanding that, because you know there's an assumption on conspirators that all of the noses were chopped off of the statues and things because Europeans wanted to hide the Africanness or the blackness of the ancient Egyptians and so on and so forth, not really realizing of everything that we're mentioning right now.
Somebody in the chat says spit and Ramo.
Yeah, there you go. Spit and Ramon. There it is, Ramon. Mm-hmm.
But again, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so I don't want to make this too long. It's already past 2 hours, or approaching 2 hours. I don't know if it's past 2 hours or approaching 2 hours. Either way it go, it's a long video, and I try not, or at least I'm trying not to do long videos so that y'all can digest them in one sitting. So I appreciate everyone who attended. I appreciate our brother Wujawu for joining me on the panel. And, please share this video, hit the like button. If you are not a subscriber to my channel, subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the Nsw.t channel. What is the full? Do you have that? Like, what do you call it so they can go to it?
Seshu Ma'ani Medonetra. Seshu Ma'ani NY Medonetra.
Yeah, so just find that on YouTube, that channel, and hit subscribe. And of course, the Amara Squad page and Real Black Atheist page and all the other pages, Mostly Warrior Clan page, and so, subscribe, hit the like, please share. And if you have any questions that you couldn't think of now, but want to hit me up later and ask, hit me up on Facebook, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Instagram, and I'll hit you back. And again, I appreciate y'all. Look forward to your feedback. And thank you all for listening. And again, a lot of what I talked about, most of damn near everything which I talked about is in my book, Nsw.t Bjt.j, King and Ancient Egyptian, which you can purchase from my website as well as Amazon.com. So appreciate all of you for listening live, and catch me next time. All right, peace.